there comes that point where my love for this person is great and I want to help them, but I also have some of those my own insecurities that color how I respond to the situation.
David and Krista, welcome to Focus.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. Krista, let's start with you. Let's start with the roots of that eating disorder. I think it might be helpful for people who aren't in this orbit, they don't know someone, or they're unaware of someone around them that might be struggling with this. So where did it begin, as best as you can assess, for your journey?
I think there were signs of it definitely when I was a kid. I wanted everything to be exactly perfect. I wanted to see everything done ahead of time so I knew exactly how to do it. Even my socks had to match kind of obsessively. And there's some of that goes along with eating disorders, but I, just as I got into college, it really kind of took over. And I saw a lot of that coming out and just magnified in what I was doing.
The book kind of described that as a perfect storm, that when you went to college, everything kind of, I don't know what the right adjective would be, kind of folded in on you, or what did you feel like?
Yeah, I had always been a really good student, valedictorian of my class in high school, but when I got to college, it was a totally different story. I couldn't keep up. I was getting C's on papers, and it was freaking me out. And
you probably had never received a C before, right, in high school?
No,
Yeah.
and so there was just the friendships, the change in environment. I didn't have a great community quite yet when it all started happening. So, yeah, it was just kind of a perfect storm.
Would you say back then you were aware of those things and you were aware that you were leaning toward a eating disorder? Would you have even thought that, or?
I didn't really know definitely what an eating disorder was. Like, I had definitely heard about it because it was just during that time there was a lot of talk about it, but I really had to look things up in order to know what was going on with me, because it really it freaked me out, and I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this.
You know what's so interesting with that is I think that's common with just about any kind of thing that we're struggling with as human beings. We're kind of in a fog. Because we can't see it clearly. That's one of the reasons we're going down a road that's unhealthy, right?
Yeah.
Because we didn't understand the warning signs and what our body was telling us, perhaps even what our intellect was telling us. You go in a direction. Most addictions are that way.
Yeah.
You don't just wake up and go, today I want to be addicted to something. You fall into it, and then it like captures you.
Yeah.
You normalize so much of what you do. This is just what I'm comfortable with, familiar with. And that normalcy creates that problem where I'm unaware of even the damage that I'm doing.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. That's what's so good about your willingness to share the story. Yeah. And David, I'm going to come to you in just 1 second. The night that you actually binged and purged was kind of the awareness for you. Describe that and how you translated that for yourself.
Yeah, it was coming off of the heels of just a really traumatic event, and I didn't know how to deal with it, and I just came back into my dorm room, and I just started eating everything in the dorm room, and like it was just an out of control feeling that I felt like I'm not in my own body, I'm just acting, and it's somebody else acting. And of course, when I did just feel the need to get rid of that food, somehow it was just, I felt guilty. I felt like, I was going to gain more weight, and that was kind of my goal, was not to do that. And so it just felt like a natural thing that's what I was supposed to do. No one had told me to do that.
It's interesting because that sounds like a coping mechanism to start. You go to the dorm, you've been squeezing down your food intake, if I remember the book correctly. And then something triggered that desire to just eat everything in sight. David, at this point, Krista, I don't know if you guys were engaged or just dating. But she was at a college pretty far away from you, and you were going to school at a different university, it sounds like. How did that long distance confession come to you? This was the first time, Krista, you had told anybody, right, that you had a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're at these different schools, 8 hours away, I think.
Yeah.
And how did you react? I don't know how I would have reacted to something like that.
Honestly, it is all sort of surreal to me. I don't remember. I remember we had the conversation. I don't remember much about the conversation. I mean, I knew I needed to do something to be helpful, but I know that I had no clue what she was really even saying. I mean, I was a nerd. I was a dorky kid. I didn't run around with people who had problems and addictions, and so my world was this little bubble
that you knew of.
Yes, that's right.
I mean,
that's right.
You probably did.
Yes, that's
know.
right. And so the concept for me was just so foreign. I had no categories for even understanding what she was talking about, what she was sharing with me, or what that meant, or how I would have to be helpful.
Krista, let me ask you the courage that it must have taken. You hadn't told a soul. David, your boyfriend, there's a risk here. If he really knows me, he may not love me. I mean, I would think that was echoing in your brain. But you did it. So I think the question is, A, why did you tell David? And then we'll talk about how you two kept that kind of secret for a while.
Yeah. So I actually wrote it all out because I knew that if I didn't do that, I was going to chicken out and not do it. And so I wrote every word out on a piece of paper and I read it to him over the phone. And it was actually easier to tell him because he was 8 hours away. I didn't want to tell anybody that was right in my circle that could really do something. But I had like a large amount of fear over what was happening. It was kind of taking over my social life, and I didn't have any friends. Like I was losing friends, and so I wanted some kind of help just for those areas. I didn't want all the help, just some of it. And I knew there was just sort of that anonymity of he's over there, I'm right here.
That's interesting. So you felt a little safer.
Yeah.
That you could tell David, and obviously David not really equipped. Like, excuse me, what? But how did that then over the next few days and weeks, did it become the thing you talked about? And if you could address why, then you kind of stopped seeking help in that. You kept it quiet, I guess.
Yeah. I didn't really, there wasn't really anything after that for a long time anyways. It was like I gave the confession and then a lot of time passed because he did have a solution for it, and I think in our minds that was kind of fixing it, at least for now. And he wanted me to move where he was so that he could help me, like be right there with me.
So reel you closer in.
Yeah.
Go to the school that he's going to.
Yeah.
And how did that work out?
Not super well. I was at a small Christian college of about 1,500, and then I moved to a large state university, and it was probably 15,000.
So it compounded
and,
all the fear.
Yeah. And I didn't have any friends, and I only knew him. And so, it took away all of the community that I did have and kind of threw me into a whirlwind of no help, no nothing. So it was much worse.
Before we move in the story a little bit, and the next one is important, but I want to lay a little more foundation about those feelings because as I've looked at it, shame and guilt are certainly a part of it. Control, to me, as I've talked to people that have struggled in this area of eating disorders, tends to be one of the high reasons. Explain what that means. I don't know that we all understand that you can actually control something and the euphoria that comes from that I've got control over what I can eat, and then you just keep dwindling it down.
Yeah.
And somehow you get kind of a high from that.
Yeah. So I think it kind of started as I knew that was a way that I could control my life. If I couldn't control my grades, I couldn't control my friends, I couldn't, control a lot of other things that were kind of coming at me. I think, at least subconsciously, there was something that was like, I can do this. I've already done some of this. I've been dieting, I've been exercising, and I can see that just happening right in front of me. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily put that into that category. But if you dig a little deeper, then it's kind of like, okay, that's going on there. And so it did help me to feel, at least in one area, that I could hold on to something and keep control over it. But I think also there just is, I mean, it's human nature to feel like, we want to have a little bit of power over something in our lives. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we concentrate this on a woman or a girl. And, I think it disproportionately affects women and girls. But guys, we have a different vocabulary about this. We talk about going to the gym and kind of dieting in a different way so we can cut fat to get more muscle tone. It's interesting that it, too, is kind of a control issue, but it seems to be maybe a little more acceptable for a guy.
Yeah.
You're really mindful of controlling your physique. Is there a parallel to that?
Yeah, we see, I mean, we meet with a lot of people who have eating disorders, and we've seen an increase in the number of men who've requested help.
Do we
to
use
talk
a
to.
different vocabulary for the guys? I guess is what I'm driving at. Do we need to
No.
be more aware?
Not
of what we're
necessarily,
doing?
but I think I am. Everybody's story is certainly their own, and so it manifests with certain, particulars that are going to be different. And so, the important part about anybody is listening to the individual. So, we always talk about we don't treat problems, we care for people. Treating problems is a sort of uniform. Oh, you have an eating disorder. I know how to do that. Let me walk you through these steps. Caring for people means you have your own story. And so the vocabulary I use is going to be dependent on the vocabulary you use. What are the things that
interesting,
are
yeah.
dominant for you? What are the themes that manifest for you? What are the pressures that are driving your behavior? So that'll be the vocabulary that I adopt in our conversation.
No, that's really good. And the other thing that I appreciate what you just said is formula.
Yeah.
Formulas, I mean, they don't work in parenting. They don't work in
Yes.
eating. There's not a formula. You can't do A plus B plus C gives you D.
Yeah.
Because, we're human beings. We have our own will.
Yeah.
All those
Yeah.
things work into it. Getting back to your story, there was a decision made. I don't know if you guys talked about it, but I think, David, you went to your pastor and confessed this situation, which created some conflict for you guys. Describe what happened.
I did not ask Krista. I mean, I had been urging her to talk to somebody for a while. Some of that was probably selfish. I didn't know what else to do or say, and so I didn't want to be like the person who felt the most responsible for this
How
situation.
long had that passed since when she moved to the college and you got married? And
Yeah, so, I mean, at least a year. At least. Maybe
Yeah.
a little more. Maybe
Yeah.
a little more than that. So it was a long period. I was naively under the impression that if I just, was with her and was talking with her, that she would get better. And that was not realistic. So then, I went to our pastor and told him, and God love him, he was a good pastor, but he didn't know any more about eating disorders than we did. And so he tried his best to be helpful. But that was a starting place, at least, for moving beyond our relationship.
Krista, that would make me feel somewhat violated, maybe. How did you feel? Was it relief or was it fear?
There was a little bit of a mixture of both. It was, it did kind of feel like there was a weight lifted off of me that, I had been carrying a lot, he had been carrying a lot, and just to kind of hand that a little bit over to someone else, even if they didn't know how to help specifically, it just was helpful for someone else to know. But there was also just kind of, like a violation. And I think for a little while, I didn't really want to show my face at church. I kind of, there was one particular week I remember that I was just like, I sat in the car for a while and then I was like, I don't want to be in there. But it got better over time, just the understanding that the people had, and they didn't know what to say directly, but some of the church members I ended up talking to, and it just kind of opened up the situation a little more and made it just...
It's difficult, I would think, David, for you, because you're at the end of your ability to help. You're concerned about Krista. your wife. You don't know what to do. If you ask her, is it okay if we share this with the pastor? She might say no,
Yeah,
and that leaves you in a dead end.
Yeah.
So you had to kind of risk that vulnerability and then take the heat a little bit. Did you ever, Krista, I'm sorry, this is really interesting to me. Did you ever say, how could you do that to us?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that we had words with each other at the time because,
Well,
it
that's
was
normal.
Yeah.
And then David, again, did you feel like in the Box Canyon, like you had nowhere to go?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I'll say this isn't a strategy we advise people with. There are certain ways to disclose information that are appropriate when you see the risk to the other person dramatically increase. But, it's best if the person suffering discloses their own struggle.
Yeah. But if they're not, what do you do?
Yeah, there comes a point where, health, sort of supersedes the quality of the relationship at that moment. The danger to Krista might have reached a point where I said, okay, it doesn't matter anymore that you're going to get mad at me. I have to do something.
It's very akin, if I could say this, Jean's family has suffered a couple of tragedies with her two brothers taking their lives. And the one thing that I've seen and learned from that experience, just being her spouse, is mental illness puts you in a fog.
Yeah.
Those around you are in that fog too, because you don't know what is going on, and you sometimes make excuses, even as the person alongside the person that's hurting.
Yeah,
and you just don't realize what's really going on, how desperate the reality is.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, sometimes our own selfishness as the person outside clouds it too. So there can be that tendency, like, if I disclose this to someone, how does that make our family look? And so, there comes that point where my love for this person is great and I want to help them, but I also have some of my own insecurities that color how I respond to the situation. And so that can keep us from asking for help.
Hey, allow me to interrupt for just a moment here to say how much we appreciate you watching. Now, if you find value in this content, subscribe by clicking below. It'll be a big help to us. Let's go ahead and return to the show.
One thing that's really critical, Krista, you mentioned in the book, it felt like at this point it was 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. I think that is true of most recovery of any nature. But you can get discouraged in that. So how did you keep the momentum going to continue to gain ground even when sometimes you were losing ground?
There's points that I think I really have no idea how I did that. But I do know, like, the Holy Spirit was definitely in that with me. And there was just really, I think, a mixture of having people from the church close by. There's, I didn't stop reading my Bible, and a lot of prayer, counseling along the way. There was always something there in my path that wasn't leaving me all alone to myself.
Yeah. But that awareness had to be a source of strength for you. Not everybody has that awareness for some reason. When you look at that, I mean, in my mind, I'm seeing like a rope with knots in it, and you're trying to work your way up. You get tired. You might slip down 1 or 2 of those knots. How did God sustain you? How did you turn to your faith? Where was the Lord? Did you feel his presence, or did you feel his abandonment? Or both?
Yeah, I think there was a mixture of both. I think this is in the book, where I was just standing in my kitchen feeling like I'm going to purge again. And I just, in my heart, thought, I want to let go of God because I want this. And that actually scared me a little bit, because I know the Bible well enough to know you don't let go of God, and he doesn't let go of you. So that kind of spun in my brain, like, how is this happening right now? And I think later steps that went on, I could see what was really happening was that, God wasn't going to let me go in that moment. And so I did still purge in that moment. And I think when we were writing the book, our editor was like, I don't think this part of the story goes there, because you you obviously are kind of backtracking. And I'm like, no, it exactly goes that way.
Oh,
like
I'm
that's
glad you did
exactly
it
how
that
it
way,
happened.
because
And,
that's real life.
yeah.
That is
yeah.
what happens. And, and people can get discouraged and kind of move off the highway of recovery at that point, take the off ramp and fall into a worse situation. Let me ask you this. A friend, I think, if I remember the story correctly, challenged you to think of the eating disorder as an idol. This is so interesting because just last night, Troy and I were reading Luke, and I was trying to ask, even for myself, what are modern idols today? Back then it was wooden statues, and the modern civilization today. Oh, how could they do that? But there are still idols,
Yeah.
and to think of your eating disorder as an idol, how did that hit you? And did you think it was accurate?
Yeah, that was a complete turning point for me because I really respected this person. She was just a really close friend of the family and had always looked out for me. We always had our differences. In fact, we used to kind of actually physically fight when we were children. But she just stepped in and said, I think that you need to think of it this way. And I was really willing to hear her because she was really invested in my life. And I think that makes a big difference too. To get advice from someone who's not really in there with you is very unhelpful. But to have someone step in who knows you very well, that made all the difference in the world. And I listened to her, and it was helpful.
Yeah, and it seems like, so there's this tether that you were able to stay connected to. Probably David was a big help in that regard, and others that were involved at this point. But you had to come to that realization, and it felt like there were two parts to this. So maybe you can address that for those listening that are going, oh my goodness, this might be me. This might be an awareness moment for people who are going, wow. So those are two big parts. One, how did you get closer to God with the realization that maybe you weren't as close as you needed to be, which is a good realization for all of us. And then second, the practical help that really saved you.
Yeah, I'll start with the practical help because I know that's just right on my mind. Is like, I needed to know like the attributes of God. I needed to know the God that I was serving, because I grew up in a church. I grew up hearing about God all the time, but there wasn't just this showing how big and great He is and how He actually is in my life, doing things, and so I really. What was helpful to me was just to start looking at the attributes of God. Like, how does that really connect with what's going on in my life? How is He powerful? How is He wise? How is He loving? I think a big thing was just to realize that I didn't know God as well as I said I did, like you had said.
So would you say more like a head knowledge versus a heart knowledge?
Yeah, definitely. So I definitely was a Christian. I definitely understood the gospel. I definitely wanted to follow God, but it just felt like that didn't really connect into my life. And so I think just searching for that to say, okay, this is a big problem, and I know that God is a big God and can help to remedy this. And so I kind of wanted my faith to still be in it, but I also knew there was a mental struggle aspect of it. And so some of what was helpful to me was just combining what I knew about the Bible, about God, and what these books were saying about an eating disorder.
This is a beautiful illustration of how two things work well together. The supremacy of our reliance and faith in Christ is bedrock. That's where it starts. But then to get help, professional help is good. And, again, so many in the Christian faith, we separate those two, and we don't do the hard work of seeing a therapist, and hopefully a Christian therapist, so that worldview is connected and that person can help in that way. It's wonderful that both you and David have taken this on to help others. But, often there is that complaint that we're trying to merge psychology and the scripture. Well, God is the God of psychology. I mean, not everything in psychology is God edifying, but God created us. And the things that entrap us, certainly the study of the brain can illuminate for us as Christians. So I just like that combination there where you started with the Lord and drawing closer to Him, His attributes, and then also got long-term help, right?
Yeah, that's how we kind of headed into the direction of finding a biblical counselor that really ended up helping me a lot. But like you said, there's just that whole need for understanding how the mind works that we can definitely take from these people in psychology that are doing a lot of studies on that and say, okay, what does the Bible say about this, and what can we use within that worldview? And what should we not listen to?
Let me ask you, just so people have a perspective, that process of being with an expert, I appreciate the fact that you sought out a biblical foundation in that expert, but was that a 1 year, 2 year, 4 year, 5 year process?
Well, it was kind of off and on because, I mean, just the nature of an eating disorder, like we talked about, just that forward and backward,
Right.
Trying to move forward. There would just come times where I was like, I think I'm done. I don't really want to be doing this anymore. I think things are better enough that I can function again. And I just would kind of drop what I was doing. And so some of that is why it took really 10 years to get better. And it wasn't just one single helper, one single counselor. It was just a multitude of them kind of helping me along.
And I appreciate that because that, it's a long process.
It is.
That's the point. It doesn't always go that way, but the reality is often it's going to be a long process and to overcome this. And I, again, applaud your courage, both of you, in doing that. David, I want to capture a couple things that you mentioned in the book. One was this idea that it's hard for someone who is in this place suffering from an eating disorder to get the help they need. You described something, David, called the spectrum of readiness.
Yeah.
What is that, and how do we apply it?
Yeah, so I think it's important to know the individual suffering with the eating disorder has to decide when they're ready to get help. And until they're ready, you can beg and plead and cajole, and one of my worst tactics was threaten. I threatened divorce, and all kinds of things that were just terrible and unhelpful to Krista and selfish. And but you could do all those things, and they might have a short-term impact, but they won't result in long-term change.
Right.
And so each person has to decide where they're at. And so in the book, we kind of outline a couple of categories. We outline a couple of categories for people when they're trying to evaluate how ready they are to change. And so it starts with just denial, and that's where almost all people struggling with anything start, right? I'm not at all prepared, interested. I don't see the problem. You're over dramatizing it. It's not that bad.
It's that fog I was talking
Yes.
about.
Yeah. And then it really goes to just that category of considering, like I'm open to hearing more about this. I'm listening. I'm not quite sure I'm ready to do anything about it, but I'm willing to hear you on it. And then there's that investigating where I'm really trying to understand what change requires of me. Now I might see that, it's possible that I have a problem, but I'm worried that change is going to be too hard. And so I want to understand more about what change requires of me. And then seeking is I'm now seeking guidance and help to make those changes. And then lastly is readiness. And I think for people who are helpers, one of the things that's important is people can go back and forth on that spectrum. They can start at, I'm ready to change today, and they can be all the way at denial tomorrow. And so it's not that you get to a place and that's where you stay. You keep evaluating. And I think as a helper, you just take the person where they're at. Oh, you're at seeking? Let's talk about that. Let's see what we can do to keep you moving forward.
I think, one of the ultimate questions for you is, why did you stay married?
I knew that I loved Krista. I knew there was no way I wanted to leave her. I knew that, this was a tall task. And I was also, I have my own issues, one of which has tended to be arrogance and overconfidence. And so I was just certain that I could help her. And, I think I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't know what I needed to learn. And that's been a very humbling experience to look back and think there's a lot of ways in which my lack of knowledge was really unhelpful to Krista. And, a lot of things I wish I could go back and do differently. But I knew that she needed support, and that was the most important thing at that moment. Even if I wasn't helpful, I just needed to keep plugging along.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. I mean, you're just laying it out there. Krista, why I would think that thought may have crossed your mind. It'd be safer for me not to be married so I can deal with this in a different way.
Yeah.
I mean, is that honest or?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think I wanted sometimes to let him go so that he didn't have to deal with me.
The guilt. feeling.
Yeah. And
Wow.
and I think if it were possible, he would have wanted to divorce from my eating disorder and have me back the way, but he didn't really know me any other way. So that was also kind of frustrating. It was like, just I want what I thought I was getting into in the first place, probably. But yeah, there was.
Well, look, here's the bottom line. You fought through this, and we're all so proud of both of you. What a great illustration of how God can work in your lives to bring about a godly change, right? That you didn't have to follow those dark feelings and escape each other, but you stuck with it. I mean, it's a great example of the wedding vow, right? For better or for worse, in sickness or in health. That's what that means, and you're illustrating it. Allow me to interrupt for a moment to say how much I appreciate you watching. If you find value in this content, please subscribe by clicking below. It'll be a big help. Now, let's get back to the show. Krista, I'm a little uncomfortable with this next question because it is so personal. But the impact of your eating disorder affected your pregnancies and did affect your children. So it, the guilt of that. I mean, it gets me teary-eyed thinking about it. Tell us what happened and what the impact was.
Yeah, so we decided a couple years into our marriage that we wanted to have kids, and it was just something we wanted to start with right away, but I knew where I was at with my eating disorder. And so I decided very wrongfully to do this, to go ahead and go to a fertility specialist because I wasn't ovulating. I wasn't anything that I needed to do to be pregnant. And so I didn't really share with them my whole backstory because at the time I really did have myself convinced I was okay. And I didn't want that to affect the whole part of my life that we were moving into. I just wanted to have a family and keep going. And so I went on fertility medications, and I've heard from other people that it's actually somewhat common for people to do that because that desire for children kind of trumps where you think your body is at.
Yeah, and
you
you're
just-
convincing yourself you're healthy.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. And so, I ended up getting pregnant on fertility medication. And we found out when our daughter was born that she had a mild form of spina bifida that's it's called tethered cord syndrome. And so she had to have surgery when she was a little over 2, or she was about 2. And that condition is really caused by the lack of nutrition of the mother sometimes, that there are certain vitamins that were missing in my diet. Well, there were a lot of them missing. And so it was hard for me just dealing with that guilt that it could have possibly been my fault because I knew it didn't have to be, but there was just something in my mind that if you would have eaten better, if you would have taken care of yourself, this wouldn't have happened. And that was really hard for me to deal
let me
with.
ask you, I mean, that sounds like a hill to climb, to find that peace, and I guess in many ways the forgiveness. That seems pretty steep, but you got there.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
I think it definitely took a lot of time. I think it wasn't even until she was much older and past the surgery to really think that I could be forgiven for that. And I think it wasn't so much a forgiving of myself, but just that I knew that I was forgiven in Christ because of what he did for me, that, that part of my life was covered, and it was something I could move on from because I wasn't holding on to it anymore. I had given it over to God. And so it was just a slow process for me. It didn't happen right away. It was just something that happened over time.
How old is your daughter now?
She's 16, but I know you had to keep telling yourself the gospel and practicing believing it again and again as you were dealing with that.
Yeah, it
Well,
wasn't just
yeah.
a one-time thing. It was, I'd come back to it. And even sometimes he would have to remind me of, okay, this isn't something that needs to be the center of your life. Like, you need to focus on Christ. And so it was a real battle for me. And I can look back on it now and know that was just another big chunk of that eating disorder problem that I had to overcome.
Did you ever, I'm thinking of these two mountains in front of you. One is the eating disorder. You're getting that in a better place than your daughter. And, that is yet another mountain of forgiveness you have to climb and find that. Did you ever have an issue with the Lord? Like, why? Why did you allow, this is always the question, right? Why did you allow my daughter to be impacted by this? What benefit is that?
Yeah.
And that's a raw question, but did you wrestle with that?
Yeah, I definitely did. And I have wrestled with it about my eating disorder as well. Just why did this have to happen? It seems kind of senseless. The same with my daughter. Why did this have to happen? But I've been able to help a lot of people who struggle with an eating disorder because I've been there and I know. And as well, we met people along the way of our daughter's just surgery and the recovery from that, and my whole family just surrounded us in prayer, just seeing them grow from the difficulty that she had. I can go back to that, and that kind of comforts me and knows like that God had something in store for all of that.
Wow. I'd say your faith has really grown.
Yes,
I
very
mean, that's
much.
what I'm hearing
Yeah.
over everything. And what a beautiful way to go.
Krista, for those around you and close to you, what would they have seen as kind of a flag, a warning that something's amiss in your eating patterns and your behaviors? And then did people ask you about things and that's why you lost friends because they were pressing into an area that you didn't want to talk about?
Yeah, at first, when I was at college, it was a lot of skipping meals. And I would make excuses for it, like I have to study for a test. And that seemed pretty normal because a lot of people would do that, but they'd eat in their room or whatever, and I wasn't doing that. And yeah, there was some of that, just that pressing into me, and I didn't want them to see it. And it was more of me, pulling away from them and not them giving up on me. It was just, I wanted to be left alone in order to do what I wanted to do. And thankfully there were people who just kept coming around, but they were seeing things like that, just skipping meals. And what my family was seeing was, I'd have just my little quirks about what I was eating. I recall one time at a family dinner, I just had a complete meltdown over not having the kind of salad dressing that I needed. And to them, it was just kind of a weird behavior. But once all the pieces were put together, there was more there. But just those people with eating disorders a lot of time have those kind of food rules. And when they're broken, you can see when they just kind of fall apart. And when they're trying to hold that together with control, then it's disconcerting for them.
David, let me ask you, so often in life we mean well, but we say not so smart things. You kind of self-confess that you're the prince of this. But I think many men would fit that. Women tend to be more in tune with that sensitivity. But we're trying, and we say things that we shouldn't say. What did you learn was least helpful for Krista?
Yeah, I don't know that there was a specific thing that I said that was the most unhelpful. It was just a general attitude. A lot of my concern tended to center around how her behaviors were affecting me. And so, some unhelpful things that I would emphasize, we're not able to go out with friends because, this is always a problem, or, we have to eat only certain, places when we eat out, or we're not, only eat. And so I would kind of bring those things up and use them in ways that made her feel guilty, which was really unhelpful. I think in general, a verse that's been really helpful to me has been Proverbs 18:13, which says, he who speaks before he listens is a fool. And the most important thing in terms of helping anybody, but especially with eating disorders, is really listening. Giving space for Krista to express what she was anxious about, upset about, where she was at in her own sort of mental framework with the issue, not trying to impose, you need to be here, you need to be thinking this, but just giving her space to share and talk and sort through things, and know that in sharing and sorting those through those things with me, I was still going to be there, and I was still going to be loving her, and I was still going to be plodding along with her. So I think that concept of listening to understand instead of listening to respond, listening to understand, and then interacting with her where she was and what she was dealing with. That's what I needed to do.
One thing that's striking me is the scripture 34:18, Psalms 34:18, where it says, God is close to the brokenhearted and saves those crushed in spirit. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting invitation to go where you don't want to go. Mm-hmm. But there's something spiritually dynamic that happens in the valley. Mm-hmm. So many sayings like, don't trust people that don't limp, right? If you only live on the mountaintops, you don't really know who you are. It seems like in that beautiful way, the Lord took you through this valley and taught you so much more about himself. Mm-hmm. And you got to go, thank you. Mm-hmm. Even though it was hard, it was difficult. Yeah. But to get through the valley and know the Lord more deeply and know yourself more deeply, wow, people can go a lifetime and not experience that.
Yeah, that was an amazing gift to me, and I can be thankful for it now that I'm
right. Doesn't
more
feel like that in the valley.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And it's an amazing gift that I can be thankful for now. I would definitely not know the Lord like I know him now because, and in the beginning, there was some of me that just wanted to resist that, and it was something God wanted to give to me, and I was running away from it. He wanted to give me more of himself and to know him better. And so, like you said, just walking through that valley, he was with me. And I can see it now on the other side that people want my help because I have gotten to the other side. Mm-hmm. And there are people who trust me to care for their problems because of that. They know, I know what they're going through. So that was a huge moment for me just to actually see that gift in a tangible way.
Well, it's almost like God says, from the ashes, right?
Yeah.
And he creates something beautiful from the ashes.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think of Romans 5:3-5, where Paul says, we rejoice in suffering, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint us, because the love of God has been poured into our hearts by the Holy Spirit whom we've been given. And that idea that suffering could somehow lead to hope that we don't yet experience and know, that's deeply profound and so important to hold on to when it feels like it's slipping away.
Let me end with Ecclesiastes 4. It's a scripture that really you took great solace in. What is it, and why did it connect for both of you?
Yeah, Ecclesiastes 4:9-12, which is the verse we kind of unpack or start the book with. It says, 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm, but how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, 2 can withstand him, and a 3-fold cord is not quickly broken. And I think for us, as we were writing the book and kind of looking back, like, how did we get here? I think we realized, the heart of the book, Table for Two, is this idea that support, companionship, working together really is the key difference in recovery. So anyone who gets better because other people help them. And anyone who learns how to be helpful learns how to be helpful because someone helped them. And so there's this idea of community as a foundational piece to any change for any problem, especially eating disorders.
Yeah. Krista, let's end here. That aha moment where you felt healed, was it like a light switch that you flipped, or was it a dimmer switch that was sliding and you woke up one day and said, I think I'm in the better place now?
It was definitely a dimmer switch. And I don't think I really have a moment in my mind where I'm like, oh, this is definitely
The day.
over. Yeah. I just discovered, I think, that I was starting to use more of a language of, victory and freedom. And I think it was a kind of a shock to myself to hear myself saying those things and just noticing them in my life. I still have moments where I look back, and we have a chili cook-off at our church, and they always need judges. And one year I volunteered to be a judge, and I just sat there and I looked around and I was like, I never would have been able to do this a few years ago.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, this is, I can see freedom in this. I can see recovery in this. And it was a really neat moment for me.
The thing I like about that, it also adds a little bit of God's humor to the story.
Yes.
You won't believe what I'm going to have you do.
Yeah.
You're going to be the judge in a chili cook-off. I mean, that's so funny in a fun way.
Yeah.
Listen, this cannot exemplify any better what our mission is. And again, I'm so grateful for the courage of Krista and David coming in and talking about, this journey of more than 10 years, but, a lifetime in the beginning for Krista. And if you're in that spot, we want to help you. This is what I mean by that example. We're here for you. We've been at this over 45 years. And I don't think you're going to shock us where you're at. So if you don't have somebody nearby, a pastor, a family member that you can talk with yet, call us. It provides that distance, a little bit of safety, but we can also help point you in the right direction. And maybe you're not in that space, but you want to be more aware so that you can help others, family members, people in your church. Get this resource, and we can get it into your hands. It works really well. If you buy it from a large corporate group, all that money goes right back into shareholders' profit. But when you get the resource from us for a gift of any amount, if you can't afford it, we'll send it to you free. How about that deal? We're going to trust others will take care of that. But if you need it, we'll get it in your hands. If you can make a gift, that's great. It all goes back into helping other families, not paying shareholders. So help us do the ministry and get a great resource.
Yeah, the starting number is 800, the letter A in the word family, 800-232-6459. And then we've got all the details in the program description. And Jim, it's really important for people to know when they call us, we want to point them in the direction of a specialized counselor to deal with this. And we have a trusted referral, a network of people that we can point you to. So make that call today and get connected to somebody. And then, as Jim said, get the book. Someone in your life is struggling with this. You need to know this great story and these scriptures. So contact us today.
David and Krista, thank you again so much. My heart is filled with gratitude, really, that you were able to come and share this powerful story of recovery. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us today for Focus on the Family with Jim Daly. I'm John Fuller, inviting you back next time as we once again help you and your family thrive in Christ.